All right. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ed Sobiesk, the Senior Civilian Professor at the Army Cyber Institute, who will be conducting a fireside chat with P.W. Singer. Dr. Sobiesk.
So, Peter, thank you very much for trying this sort of different format for a talk. Dr. Singer is a strategist at New America and also a fairly famous author. A few weeks ago, he published a book that is perfect for this topic on the weaponization of social media. It's called Like War. And he's agreed to allow me to interview him for the next 30 minutes. So first of all, just full disclosure to the audience and you, I'm a big fan. Cybersecurity and cyber war, what everyone needs to know, is still at the top of my list for intro books. And then I think we all enjoyed the fictional path that you went with Ghost Fleet. Congratulations on both. I guess I wanted to ask you as the first question, Like War is back to the nonfiction realm, and it's gotten great reviews. I know that everybody from the NATO's Allied Commander to, Director of Defense Intelligence has been recommending it. I personally loved it. What made you return to nonfiction? And maybe tell us a little bit about what Like War is, how you researched this book and how it came about.
Sure. So let me begin by thanking you for the kind words, but also for the invitation to join all of you here. This is a great conference for bringing together specialists and the like, and you can actually tell it from the kind of questions that happened during the Q&A that we just watched. This is a very different kind of event, so it's special for me to be invited. Like War is, like so much else in terms of terminology in this space, a bit of a play on words. It has two meanings. One is it's the idea that social media that began as something for fun and then became something for profit and became essentially the nervous system of the modern world, changing everything from dating to business, has also become a battlefield. It's a battlefield that is crucial to the outcome of everything from elections to the rise and fall of terrorist groups to outcomes of physical battles, and has in effect changed the rules of the game and who can thrive, who can win. The opening of the book, for those of you that hasn't read it yet, is Donald Trump's very first tweet. I went back and read all of Donald Trump's old tweets so that you didn't have to. And, it starts out in 2009, and essentially, even he would say he was in a fundamentally different place, and yet that tweet became part of the story of one of the biggest changes in American politics and maybe global politics in over a generation. The next scene is ISIS putting out a hashtag announcing its invasion of Mosul. So the very opposite of how you would invade, instead of keeping it secret like the D-Day invasion, they put out hashtag all eyes on ISIS. They wanted the world to watch because in particular they wanted the Iraqi army to watch and know that they were coming. They spread the message that their victory was inevitable online, and then it became inevitable in the real world by pushing fear ahead of it. So it's this idea that social media has become like a war zone, but then there's a second aspect of it, and it's the idea that it's become almost like a form of conflict or a form of war. If cyber war, what we all gather here to talk about, is about the hacking of networks, Like War is about the hacking of people on the networks by driving ideas viral through a mix of likes, lies, and the network's own algorithms. And there's a couple of things that come out of that are significant. One, for those of us who care about cybersecurity, this has become an aspect of it that is growing and maybe even more determinate. As just an illustration, effect on elections, we've seen hacking of candidate emails multiple times. McCain, Obama campaigns all had it play out. The Like War side of it, the driving messages viral on social media, that's what gave it impact in the 2016 election. Or if you're looking at cyber terrorism, we've had a lot of discourse about terrorist groups hacking. We had the ISIS creating the cyber caliphate, which we now know was actually a lot of it was bunk, pushed online virally by Russian sock puppets. But again, the story of ISIS and the internet is more about the social media side. So it's not only important, but what we also found in terms of the hacking of networks, in terms of the people on them, the very same tactics are utilized by a wide range of actors. So this is a space where ISIS's top recruiter and Taylor Swift are using the very same tactics to achieve fundamentally the same goal in terms of online, but with very different effects offline. And final point of it is, if we don't understand these new rules of the game, we are the losers of them. And you can see, again, that's played out in everything from counter ISIS campaigns, Russia, Ukraine, the effect on democracies writ large, rise of extremist groups, to celebrities trying to battle with Taylor Swift. So that's what the project is about. Why did I change to nonfiction from fiction? This project actually ran alongside it. We were conducting research for this for the last 5 years. There was a team, there's a co-author on it, Emerson Brooking. There was a team of young researchers from University of Texas, Arizona State University. And essentially we started back 5 years ago, and we were looking at changes. What drew us into it was things like Al-Shabaab taking over a shopping mall in Kenya, and showing how, again, the rules of the game had changed. The Kenyan government tries to close down communication, doesn't let journalists report it, and then Al-Shabaab becomes the primary news source for the world about its act of terrorism. Or a different change was US military policy 5 years back, changes to allow service members in the field to use social media, which connects the home front in a fundamentally new way, but it also allows US soldiers and Taliban members to friend each other. So all of these kind of changes were what drew us into it. And then, of course, over the course of the 5 years, we saw everything from the rise of ISIS, Russian campaigns in Ukraine, and then many of the same actors popping up in our own elections.
So just as a quick follow-up, could you just for 30 seconds talk about how you actually researched the book besides the reading the tweets? What other techniques did you use to figure these?
Sure, and I think this is very important to a lot of us. We've got researchers and the like, and policy analysts. Part of what we saw going on in this space and why we were missing the story, when I say missing the story and we, I mean everything from the reporters to analysts, people within government, is that for something that was so for something that was about networking, we were incredibly stovepiped. People who were interested in ISIS in the Middle East were not familiar with Russian disinformation operations and activities in Ukraine. People that were interested in American domestic politics, for example, the reporters assigned to election campaigns, had no familiarity with Russian disinformation campaigns, history of Soviet activity. So by these stovepipes, we were missing what was going on in different spaces. And then in turn, on the methodology side, the people who did big quant studies weren't familiar with military history or Silicon Valley culture, pop culture. And then finally, no one of these other areas was interested in interviewing the people today who were the key actors. So we brought together everything from big data quant to military history to psychology studies to we did interviews with everything from the literal godfather of the internet itself, extremist group recruiters, members of the US military, from line officers all the way up to a retired 3-star general who, to make a pop culture reference, may have committed a little bit of light treason along the way, to celebrities who talked us through how you manipulate the online world to get what you want. And so by picking and pulling these different lessons from different fields, we felt like we really got at the truth of the story.
Well, Thank you. One of the things we do at the Army Cyber Institute is really advocate a multidisciplinary, multi-domain viewpoint. You just gave a great pitch for that perspective. So one of the things that's really fascinating about the work is that it spans every place from sort of a section or a chapter on China, Russia, ISIS, fringe American groups, politicians. And my next question is did you, across these vast different places and techniques, did you see parallels and did you see differences?
So I'm gonna push slightly back at you on the idea of fringe groups, because part of the story that's what has happened is that the internet has, and in particular social media, has empowered us all, including the fringe, and helped draw them into the mainstream.
Sure, and fringe was sort of a friendly way of saying like white supremacists, for example.
We should never be friendly about them.
Okay, correct.
No. This is I mean, we're being playful about it, but it is a fundamentally serious issue that we in our space as national security analysts and leaders don't pay enough attention to. Even I'll apply it to kind of a discourse. We may talk later about social media company responsibility. They were talking about the ability to recognize and screen for terrorist propaganda, extremist propaganda. And they talked about, yeah, well, we can automate and we can, for example, detect an ISIS black flag and then screen that out. And all of us in this room could probably do that. And then I pushed back and said, isn't that interesting? You use that example rather than, for example, 1488. Which is a neo-Nazi, essentially lingo. It's a way of hiding out in the open. The 14 words, sort of a white supremacist pledge. 88, 8, H is the eighth letter of the alphabet, HH, Heil Hitler. 1488 has been used by everything from a number of these previously fringe leaders who become social media celebrities. For example, the individual behind the Pizzagate conspiracy theory that we talk about in the book, who is actually was a U.S. Navy Reserve intelligence analyst. Often 1488 popped up in his feed coincidentally to the synagogue shooter in Pittsburgh. What I'm getting at is, in discussions of extremism, we found social media has empowered it, but what's notable is and yet we aren't aware of kind of the lingo. Similarly, the aspect of internet troll culture, crucial to understanding election politics today, and yet most of us aren't familiar with it. Even much like back in cybersecurity, we don't understand the basic terms. We will say things like those Russian trolls, when they weren't trolls, they were sock puppets or bots. So this is kind of a call for us to, just like 10, 15 years back, we all had to get smart about the language, the terms, the dynamics of cybersecurity. We have to do the same for the like war side of things. To hit your broader question, we are seeing both a share of tactics across this battle space. So you see a similarity, as I mentioned, of tactics that the Internet Research Agency in Russia is using that is parallel to what alt-right activists might use. And then they might layer on top of each other. So for example, among the most retweeted of the accounts by false Russian accounts were alt-right leaders and conspiracy theorists. So who Russia identified as being best to amplify to harm American democracy were these figures. So you see shared tactics, but we're seeing the battle space fracture in terms of the internet has become balkanized. So China, if you are in China, you have a fundamentally different internet experience than you do if you are in the US because of government level controls. Similarly, certain states, Saudi, Turkey, what you post online, there's government monitoring and arrests for it in a way that there isn't in democracy. Democratic states, for example, in the EU or the US. So what we're getting at here is it's a similar tactics, but different battle spaces reflecting both governments and the different corporations that predominate in those spaces. And what that is raised is questions of, how to put this, the balance of power is, in terms of internet power, is affected by the ability to attack or defend based upon both your awareness and knowledge of these tactics and how you've caught it up to your doctrine, but also how secure you've made your own battle space for your own public. And I should be clear here, and this is very appropriate to what's gathered us here, that does not mean, however, that the United States is at an inherent disadvantage, or is this some kind of call for us to give up our rights and have a Saudi, Turkey, Chinese, Russian-style internet. Instead, we have a contradiction for the United States. We have a problem. We are the nation that literally invented the internet. We are also the nation that other democracies point to and say, don't let what happened to them happen to us. And when you speak to, and you may interact with people in this room, when you speak to defense planners, this is particularly the case for those from the Baltics, they use us as the scare example. That, however, points to a positive. I look at what has been done in specifically the Baltics and the Estonias and the like as examples of how you can have a very vibrant digital democracy and still figure out how to protect your nation better against this other form of online threat. And a lot of that comes from recognizing that there is a threat and then developing whole of society responses to it.
So I guess just before we leave this topic, I think we hear a lot about the weaponization of social media in Russia because so much of that possibly involves the US. Is China weaponizing social media more towards its internal population, or is China also, in your mind, weaponizing it on a global scale?
So it has, and this has become sort of a point of the president and certain members of the administration put out a narrative about Chinese influence operations. And look, if, as you mentioned in terms of my book history, if there's anyone who would be incentivized to agree with them, having written a book on a potential US-China war and then a book on social media and influence operations, I ought to have been the one out there saying, yes, they're right. And no, we've saw no evidence of the social media style influence operations like conducted by Russia targeting American politics, and the administration provided no evidence of it. In fact, what that discourse was an evidence of part of the problem. It was whataboutism, trying to kind of distract from the Russian-style disinformation campaigns, the aspect of Russiagate and the like. That is not to say that China does not conduct operations to try and expand its influence, but so far it's not been through, we've seen evidence of kind of, buying bots on scale or false personas online. Instead, it's more about foreign aid, providing mass level infrastructure construction in, for example, the states in Southeast Asia, or if you're in Australia, you're deeply concerned about what's played out in some of the island states, and the question of whether the Chinese model of the internet in terms of accompanying state surveillance can be exported to these neighboring states. And essentially whose model of the internet will win out. That's more the question in terms of China's internet power that concerns me.
But you discuss, I think, almost how emerging in China, you're going to have a credit score, but it's more of a loyalty score that's going to be in, everything is kind of almost being tracked. It feels sort of Orwellian.
Absolutely, and Orwellian, but in a way that even Orwell couldn't have imagined. We explore the idea of essentially, there's different ways that authoritarian regimes have fought back against the once perceived liberating power of the internet. using social media. One is that they can monitor on scale in a way that they couldn't previously, and then they can bring the power of the state down on someone for what they say or do online. So, in the book, we use an example of, we've finally gotten the answer, does retweet equal endorsement? We have this story of a journalist in Turkey who retweets a story for 9 minutes and then brings it down, but it lands him in a Turkish prison. So at least in the eyes of the Turkish government, retweet equals endorsement. Then you have using to control the network itself. And it might be through web throttling, to the Chinese system of screening out words, images, so you're controlling the means of information, to incentive models. That's a social credit system where you are monitored on scale and then you receive societal rewards or punishments based upon your online activity. So what they're building towards, for example, you get a single score. That score goes up, for example, if you buy diapers online, because it shows that you're a responsible parent. If you play video games too long, your score goes down. But like every social network, your score also depends on the others in your network. So if your brother says not enough, if your brother is negative about the regime, your score goes down. So then you go to your brother and you say, hey, knock it off. Because the key is the score brings real world consequences. It's already weaving into everything from micro rewards, free charging at Starbucks, to punishments. You don't get access to beds on overnight trains, to it's used in job evaluations, to it's being woven into online dating. So if you have a poor score, you will not be matched with someone who is attractive. That, again, poor score in the eye of the government, not the other person you want to date. So again, that model, other nations are looking at, whether it's a Thailand to a Cuba to even Russia has asked for aid from China. And how can we create this kind of system of mass scale monitoring, web screening, but also potentially this sort of incentive scoring control model? That, again, going back to my discussion about the different battle spaces, that will be very difficult for our operations to penetrate in the way that someone else has penetrated into influence campaigns on Facebook or the like. But much like I'm okay with not having a North Korean style cybersecurity, I'm okay not having a Chinese style system in exchange for kind of the rights that we have.
Okay. So one of the things that we talked about right before we came up here is that I wanted to make sure I asked you, what can we do? What policies should we have? Would you like to talk on that? Maybe we're kind of winding down, but I definitely don't want to not have you speak on that.
Yeah, so real rapidly, and it links to what you continually hear, there's no silver bullet solution in this space. And secondly, by recognizing it as a realm of conflict, a realm of war, it also means it will never stop. There will never be a solution to it. There will always be a back and forth, as a Clausewitz would tell. Recognizing this new form of threat and the fact that it never goes away then colors everything from how government, private sector, and we as individuals respond. Government, it's akin to how, roughly a generation back, we all started to go, hold it, hacking the networks matter. We need to build training, doctrine, build it into professional military education. The very same thing when it comes to this consequential like war side of things. And that colors everything from, we end the book with the example of a training program at a US military base that's layered this kind of activity over the top of physical battlefield training, because that's what happens in the real world, to mimicking what other successful states have done in this space, to bringing back Cold War programs that were interagency. It was called the Active Measures Working Group, that's needed now, just recognizing that the battle space is not the third world, it's social media that we're all playing in. Private sector private companies equally need to kind of wake up to the fact that they are not just running the nervous system of the modern world, they're running a battle space. I think they're going through that transition right now. It's almost like their parents going through the stages of grief at what happened at their babies. So they went from denial, Zuckerberg saying it's a pretty crazy idea that there was mass disinformation or that it might have influenced people's votes. That was 2 years ago, to now they're in the bargaining period. Well, look at all the stuff we've done. We've created a war room, but there's still a long way to go. A particular area for the private sector companies is to do something about what I mentioned, the role of these super spreaders. We're all online, but we're not all equal. There is a small number of people, just like in the vector of disease spread and viral misinformation, there's a small number of people behind the spread of conspiracy theory, hate and extremism, and enabling foreign government disinformation campaigns. And what's interesting is they align often. So if you figure out what to do about them, you will make all of those problems a lot, you'll reduce them. They won't go away, but you'll make the job harder. And fortunately for private sector companies, while we all have freedom of speech in our democracies, you do not have an inherent right to spread false information designed to harm people on a private network and violating its rules. Finally, you and I, recognizing that we are all targets of this and we are all combatants. When I say we are all, everything from people wearing the uniform to your parents. And understanding this targeting, again, whether it's a marketing campaign or a political campaign, understanding not only are you being targeted, but you are the one that decides whether not only it goes viral all the way online, you contribute to the algorithm deciding that, but you individually decide whether your friends and family are taken in by it because you're the one that shares it into their network. And so if we understand the new rules of the game, if we understand the tactics that are being used, we're less likely to be taken advantage of as victims, and even worse, be the perpetrators of it against our friends and family.
So last 2 minutes, next 5 to 10 years, what's your best guess?
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
Yeah. Well, first thing is, I'll just put it this way. We're at a remarkable inflection point for a lot of key issues here. One is, as I mentioned, the private sector companies are going through this sort of soul searching and policy change. And we really are going to, and not just, it's going to be the next like 6 months that's going to decide a lot of questions of how we deal with disinformation campaigns, conspiracy theory, hate speech. We're seeing a lot of things being decided on that. Similarly, in terms of government policy, there's a lot of different ways we can go. I will say what's notable is that the tech companies that were once sort of the untouchable heroes are now political footballs in almost every state. Both right and left wing now see advantage in going after them, and that issue is going to continue. They're going to be political issues in a way they weren't previously. More broadly, think about all the issues that have played out with the internet writ large, with social media, and only half the world is online right now. What happens is the other half comes online. And again, that's everything from what does it mean for secrecy of operations as you deploy into areas. The bin Laden raid was outed in Pakistan. Pakistan has since brought, please, I'm on stage, so I say, don't hold me to this number, but I believe it's something like 50 million more people in Pakistan have come online since the bin Laden raid was outed by people being online. But what I'm worried about is this. We've had nations that have had over 2 centuries of experience at democracy, have thought they had strong institutions of a free press, a strong judiciary, good civil military relations, and yet they've been challenged as never before by things playing out on social media. What's the impact on weak democracies or democracies with not healthy civil military relations or not healthy media or the like. That's my real concern. And again, that circles back to the need for both government and the private sector to kind of get on top of this problem, because if we don't watch out, we're going to see a lot of negative turns, not just in the 10-year range, but like the 1-year range.
Well, thank you so much for the last 30 minutes. Remarkable. A truly important book and research. And as a small token of our thanks, I believe I have some chocolate hiding over here. So, thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.